5. Planning the operation did not take long. Rodin had their routines down and knew how to gain silent access to their house. The security system might have looked impressive, but whoever installed it had cut corners. He had left the standard back door open. For most security system installs, the technicians would use a generic code to test it. This code needed changing as soon as everything was set up. The clients should be instructed to change this, but sometimes the installer forgot to mention it. Maybe a memory slip, or maybe a conscious decision. Rodin had heard of installers working with house breakers, giving them inside information and taking a cut of their gains. Occasionally, the installer changed the code without informing the clients, passing the new code on to a third party. Or maybe the clients simply hadn't got round to changing the code. Rodin tried the generic code, but it had been changed. He went through the information he had on the couple, especially the data pulled from Alia's screen. All the seemingly inconsequential stuff like dates. People always needed a code they could remember. After much trial and error, he stumbled upon the right combination. A sequence of letters and numbers, her birthdate followed by his. He was into the system. After that, it only took a few minutes to set everything up. It was not time yet, though. He ran through exercises, taking himself off to a park to run a few miles. He ate at a small cafe, a light pasta lunch, then spent the afternoon checking his tools. As evening fell, he read reports on his screen, resting before donning his jacket, tools in place. It was late evening when he left, and it was dark by the time he reached the couple's house. They should both be in, settling down for the night. He walked through the gate, wanting to tap his screen in thanks. He closed it behind him, making as little noise as possible. The security light failed to shine, following the instructions he had sent. He didn't head for the front door, but made his way down the side of the house, using the shadows to take a look at his screen already linked into their eyes. The couple were already upstairs. Rodin had seen the light in the window as he approached. As he had hoped. The main space downstairs was too large with too many exits. In their bedroom, their options were more limited. Easier for Rodin to take control. He headed to the back of the house and opened the door. Again, no alarm. There was enough light from the moon for Rodin to make his way to the stairs, but he knew the layout of the room anyway. He could have crossed it with his eyes shut. Their bedroom door was closed, with light spilling around the frame. Rodin turned on his torch and shone it in his face for a moment, angled up and away, getting his eyes accustomed to the light that would burst out when he pushed the door in. For a moment spots danced, but they settled. In one movement he stowed the torch and pushed through the door. He was ready. In the blink of an eye, he knew the position of everything. The bed was in the middle of the room. There was a built-in hanging space to his left. By the door was a small table, a stool tucked under it. The window was to his right, the coverings held tight across it. At the head of the bed to each side was a side table, each with a lamp that was turned on. Fallon was on the left, Alea on the right. Both were sat up, the cover to their waist, screens on their laps. Fallon was bare-chested, but Rodin could see a waistband, shorts or trousers he couldn't tell. Alea wore a short-sleeved top that ended beneath the bed coverings. They both looked up in surprise, but Rodin was already on the bed, treading between the mounds of bodies, his legs adjusting for the give in the mattress. He twisted, thrusting an elbow into Fallon's chest as he brought the lance up to Alia's neck, sending the drug through her body, her eyes open wide, her screen sliding to the floor. Rodin twisted to Fallon. The man was clutching his chest but already stretching out. As an arm flew his way, Rodin used the lance once more, pressing the button to release the drug before he leapt out of the way, back to the foot of the bed. The drug worked quickly, but both fought well. Alea had rolled to one side, the bed cover flung back, one bare leg reaching out to foot on the floor. Fallon was still recovering from the elbow in his chest, but one hand was reaching out to the side table, the drawer slightly open. Rodin could make out a blade, the handle at the tip of Fallon's fingers. But both now were unmoving. Rodin pushed Alea onto her back, leaving her legs free of the bed cover. There would be no point covering them, not with the instructions he had been given. She was the first to find her voice. and she recognized him.
You? What the hell do you want?
Rodin was impressed. Her voice wavered and he knew she was scared, but she kept her control. She held his gaze as if daring him to do his worst. Fallon's lip was quivering, and he was struggling to get words out. The first word was one Rodin had heard so often, and one that had absolutely no effect on him.
Please, don't hurt us.
A whimper. Rodin should really feel sorry for the man. But he had a job to do. This is not personal. I am working for someone else. I have instructions which I will fulfill, and there is nothing you can say or do to change this. He kept his voice low and steady. Even though his instructions would mean the couple suffering and ultimately dying, he wanted them to understand how things stood. He wanted them to accept their fates, rather than wasting their efforts looking for a way out. The drug in the lance is Corilax. You won't be able to move your bodies, and you won't feel a thing below your necks. But you can still talk, although I would prefer it if you thought before you did so.
Is this about your landlord?
Part of Rodin wanted to laugh, but another part was impressed. The woman was incapacitated, with someone hovering over her who clearly meant trouble, and she had the presence of mind to think. Totally wrong conclusion, but she was thinking all the same. I don't care about the landlord. This is my job. He waited, letting that last sentence sink in. Fallon was still blubbering, a sound that was now nothing more than a background whine. Alea was thinking again.
It was a way to get into my office. You hacked my screen for our home security, didn't you?
Rodin wondered what she was doing with someone as pathetic as Fallon. Rodin knew that if the Corilax had not prevented it happening, the man's crotch would be soaked in his own urine by now. That reminded Rodin of one more thing he had to do. He reached into his pocket and removed the thin gloves, putting them on with exaggerated manners, letting the couple take in every stretch of the material. Letting them envisage the worst. This was torture, and Rodin did feel uncomfortable with it. But his instructions had been very clear. The old man wanted the couple to squirm. He wanted their last few moments alive to be filled with mental anguish. Fallon was already there. But Alea was remarkably calm. Rodin doubted if he would be able to push her as far as the old man wanted. He also realized that he didn't want to. He focused. He was here to do a job. He needed to fulfill the contract. He needed to do the things that would help him sleep at night. He spoke the script. You should have kept your games to yourselves. When Rodin first read the words, they had no clear meaning to him. But now, since watching the couple's activity with the young woman, he was starting to get an idea. And when Alea next spoke, her words confirmed it.
This is about the girl? The one who died? You seriously think we had something to do with that? She was as much a friend as someone we hired. This can't be about her, can it?
Rodin tilted his head, raising his eyebrows. Let her imagine he knew everything, and give her space to talk. He needed to hear what she said. But she said no more. He imagined she wanted to turn away from him. Instead she spoke, her voice firm and quiet.
Get on with it then. Do whatever you have to.
He didn't want to. She was strong in so many ways. It felt wrong to remove her in this way. He had seen nothing to indicate she deserved it. But it was what he had to do. He threw off the bed covering, exposing Fallon's shorts. He pulled these down, the floppy muscles of his legs a dead weight. He brought out a length of cord, tied it as he had done on the fat man, and then sliced down with his blade. There was more blood this time. Strange. Rodin would have imagined the fat man to have contained more blood. But maybe in a smaller body it was more concentrated. Or maybe the band was not as tight this time. The man was whimpering, his lip twitching as he struggled with half-formed words. There were tears streaming to his pillow. He held up the bloodied flesh, bringing it to Fallon's face as he had been instructed to. He placed it on the man's chest, nestled amongst the few wiry hairs, and used his screen to take a couple of shots. Pretty much the same as with the fat man. Rodin doubted the old man had the imagination to come up with something better. although he could now see how the act was symbolic. Both contracts were the result of the girls they had hired. And the one Alea had mentioned, the one who had died, was key. He needed to find out more. But he wouldn't learn anything else from the couple. Fallon would talk gibberish, and Alea would remain strong to the end. He doubted if even his next act would crack her. It wasn't something he was looking forward to, and he was not proud to pull up her top. She wore nothing else. As he pulled her legs apart and thrust Fallon's flesh as far up as it would go, he kept his eyes on her stomach. Even as he started wondering how much of the blood was his and how much was hers, he focused on her navel. It was strange how it seemed to dip in, and yet the point in the middle stood out. Her stomach was flat. She had clearly looked after her body in a way that Fallon had not, and from the right angle Rodin was sure the belly button would stand proud. There were noises in the room. Some the sobs and wails and grunts were from Fallon. The softer whimpers were from Alea. He used his screen once more, only looking at the image in the glass for the briefest of moments. Then he remembered the nightmares, and forced himself to focus on the screen. It was easier with the image at a remove. There was a swirl of color, from a pitch black in the center, with rivers and wrens of deep red fading to smudges of pink. Short strands of tight hair stood up, matted and clumped. It didn't look like part of a person. It looked like something to be cooked. A chunk of meat. His meat and her meat. Everyone was meat. When it came down to it, that was all anyone was. Meat with sentience for a number of years. After that, rotting meat. Food for the worms. The man and woman were almost there. One day, Rodin would join then. The old man would get there before him. His son might take longer, but Rodin wouldn't be surprised if he became a carcass before his father. But at the moment, this couple were still sentient. Their meat held a beating heart and a pulsing brain. It was time to fulfill the contract. He brought the blade sharply across Fallon's throat, dodging the arc of blood as usual. He had got that wrong in the early days, finding himself in the wrong position. On more than one occasion, he had to wipe the target's blood from his face. Then he turned to Alea. She was barely making a sound, as if keeping everything deep within would make all the problems go away. It wouldn't. Only Rodin could do that now. He moved, brought himself down so that his head was near hers, so that his face filled her vision. He took a breath. This is my job. If I didn't do this, someone else would. It is nothing personal. As if she would care. As if it would make things in any way better for her. She had seen her partner mutilated, and had been molested by a strange man. She was about to die, and she knew it. Words would not make it any better. Or any worse. And maybe the words weren't for her. I am not proud of what I've done. You didn't deserve this. She was focused on him, and Rodin forced himself to hold her gaze even though he desperately wanted to look somewhere else. Anywhere else. I'm sorry. He thought he cried out as he sliced her throat. It didn't bother him that her blood flew onto his arm. It didn't matter that he felt the warmth as a few drops splashed across his cheek. He used the screen again, a couple of images of Fallon, a couple of Alea. Evidence to prove the contract was fulfilled. He took another look at the limbs on the crimson sheet, forced himself to see the gaping holes, blood still oozing out. And then he pulled up the bed cover. Up to their necks. Covering those straight red lines. Then he reached out and closed two pairs of unseeing eyes. If you could ignore the growing stains and the coppery tang in the air, the couple could simply be sleeping.